This video is sponsored by Ridge. More on them later. Never before have online games been as important as over the last 12 months or so. Now that the outside world is a dangerous place to go, it's fallen to digital media to pick up the slack and provide some much needed social interaction with your fellow video gamers. Online games were all sorts of wonderful even before a global pandemic, but your enjoyment often hinges on the quality of the players you find on your travels, something that becomes even more apparent when you attempt to play less popular online games and realize that you're all alone. That's such an empty feeling when you're playing an online game that isn't as full of players as it should be in order to function properly, and if anything, it demonstrates the value that other players provide to the online experience. I can play an offline indie game on my own, but online games are so incredibly reliant on a thriving player base, and I think it's fascinating to look back on those games that resemble ghost towns. It's a bit early for Halloween, ain't it? Not all failed online games are the worst thing ever made, and more often than not, they're just the victim of not quite being unique enough to develop their own audience, or just bad timing. Something with excellent timing is this video sponsor's Ridge, with their incredibly stylish front pocket wallet that is so light and durable that I've never felt more comfortable with, entrusting my money to a wallet like this. It's always good to have something reliable to fall back on when discussing online flops. Don't tell me that you're still keeping your big chunky wallet in your back pocket like some kind of cave person. I myself have long since leapt into the future thanks to today's sponsors Ridge, with their incredibly sturdy wallets that are available in more than 30 colours and can hold up to 12 cards that you can now carry around in your front pocket with a bit of style. When I say that these wallets are sturdy, I mean that they're resistant to chainsaw attacks, and I'm sorry, but your leather equivalent is being turned to pulp in the same situation. Plus, Ridge were also kind enough to send me their waterproof commuter backpack with shock-resistant laptop holder and an external USB port for on-the-go charging, and now it's slightly safer to go outside, I'm gonna be using this quite a lot. Ridge comes with a lifetime warranty, so you can buy one wallet for the rest of your life if you so wish, with a 45-day return window for a free refund if you're not such a fan. Also, Father's Day is coming up and the Ridge wallet makes a great gift. Make sure you check out the Father's Day guide on the site and find the best gift for your dad. You can get 10% off today with free worldwide shipping and returns by going to ridge.com/RabbidLuigi and using the code RabbidLuigi. That link is also in the video's description if you don't fancy typing all of that out. It's time to move your wallet into the future. Alrighty then, let's look at some very unpopular online games. I'm sure someone loved them at some point. I realise that talking about all types of online games opens this video to a huge variety of genres. I know there are certain tropes to expect from the stereotypical online video game and how popular shooters are, but I do think it'd be very interesting to start this video off with a game that didn't gain much traction because of the kind of game it was. Any list of the best online games around right now will inevitably be littered with shooters and MMORPGs, but 2016's The Tomorrow Children is a complete curveball that runs tangentially to everything that you'd expect an online game to be. And that's wonderful, because instead of shooting some poor schmo in the face, you gather resources and perform tasks with your fellow terrifying players in this weirdly beautiful allegory for communism and how you're all working towards improving the crappy town you live in with no obvious personal benefit. It's often a bit of a grind to get anything done, but there's this strange sense of solidarity that you get from doing these monotonous chores with other human players who are choosing to do something equally boring to help everyone else. Is everyone still following on with all of that? It's a hard game to explain, it really is. And actually, that's one of the main reasons why it was never all that popular. The most popular online games build on pre-established conventions to give the general public something understandable to latch onto in order to cultivate a nice healthy player base that will support the game for years to come. The Tomorrow Children is so out there that it's no surprise that a lot of players didn't care for its unusual gameplay and strange take on co-op. And when the reviews came in that reinforced these concerns with low scores and a 54 on Metacritic, it was always likely to be an uphill struggle from there. There was definitely a niche community behind the Tomorrow Children, but this was nowhere near enough to keep the game alive for long, and even with a free-to-play model incentivizing any unsure players, it wasn't enough, and so the servers were shut down in 2017, slamming the door shut on this surreal world full of metaphors and seriously impressive lighting. We're going to see a wide spectrum of different games that fail to gain much of an online presence, but perhaps The Tomorrow Children is one of the sadder examples out there. A game that didn't get very far because it was a lot of work to understand it. I'm still not 100% sure I've got it right. Online games are ultimately a big leap of faith. You can pour time and resources into a concept that you feel will take off with the right kind of fans, but if your timing is off by just enough, or if you're not quite meeting the demand in the market for a particular type of game, then it's just not going to work out for you. Lawbreakers had all the hallmarks of another stylized shooter with two teams of high-powered characters zipping all over the place thanks to the low-gravity mechanic that would hopefully set it apart and give it a unique selling point that would carry it forward. I have no major problems with how this game was made or how it felt to play, but the reality of the market in which it was released into is that Lawbreakers was going up against Overwatch, and I'm sorry, but that's a lot to ask. Blizzard are a big company with an eye-watering marketing budget, whereas Lawbreakers was the brainchild of Cliff Bleszinski and his studio of 65 employees. Key part of that sentence is the word was, that kinda gives the game away. Lawbreakers never stood a chance. I only played Lawbreakers a few times, and while it was definitely a little bland and something that I had experience playing a whole bunch of different shooters like it was completely inoffensive and the type of game that I could happily waste some time with from a day-to-day basis without too many complaints. But that's just it. That is not a great business model when you're going up against a juggernaut as big as Overwatch. And when Overwatch is struggling nowadays, honestly, what hope did Lawbreakers ever have? That's the thing, there's not a lot wrong with Lawbreakers. It's not like you can point to some performance issues or a terrible gameplay mechanic that is clearly the sole reason why Lawbreakers never got far off the ground, because it's honestly not all that bad an experience. The harsh reality is that it's a game that isn't quite unique enough to find an audience in a market saturated to near breaking point with characterful multiplayer shooters. The comparisons with Overwatch are inevitable and not very flattering in Lawbreakers' favour, since while Lawbreakers was very happy to point out how fast its shooting gameplay was and how the low gravity would change everything, Overwatch poured all of its character into its characters, and made sure to give them unique personalities and fun movesets. Lawbreakers underwent a bit of a slow, agonizing death, since while there was plenty of room for optimism after its closed beta peaked at 7,500 players, the open beta had 40% fewer players in its servers. By the time it had launched for real, this had sunk to 60% fewer, and there was no way back from there, with Lawbreakers going free to play a few months before shutting down completely a little over a year after its release. Like I said, it's not a terrible game that deserved to be forgotten this quickly, but it is a cautionary tale about the dangers of launching a game and relying on it to make money in a market bursting at the seams with competitors. It's a death by 1,000 missing players. Some games are victims of bad timing and would have done a lot better for themselves if they were released like 4 or 5 years earlier. But some games are so misguided and so doomed from the start that it's no surprise that no one played it, really, even at launch. Do these make for easy targets? Absolutely. Am I still going to talk about them? You bet your sweet bippy I am. I am a little hesitant to discuss disastrous online games because I'm kind of liking the vibe we've struck so far of talking about unlucky games that couldn't quite grab a hold of a large enough audience to survive. Ultimately, I decided that I've got to do it, because there's more than one way that an online game can fail so hard that the prospect of a functioning lobby full of real-life players is little more than a pipe dream, and when I think about something like Umbrella Corps that was never likely to succeed, I just can't stay silent. It's easy to forget now that we have scary Resident Evil games to play again, blessed with giant women, that this franchise was in a really bad place not too long ago. Resident Evil 6 was meant to be this spectacular Avengers Endgame-esque collaboration that brought together a bunch of different fan-favourite characters for one massive interconnected story, but it didn't work out so good. Maybe if Resi 6 was incredible, something like Umbrella Corps would have been more appealing, but sadly it wasn't, and it left Umbrella Corps with an impossible task. A Resident Evil spin-off that focuses on competitive shooting and completely de-emphasizes horror. It's like Capcom wanted it to fail. Umbrella Corps couldn't have come out at a worse time. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if Capcom were to pull this kind of stunt in 2021 now that the franchise is in better condition, but with Resident Evil having seen better days following on from Resi 6, Umbrella Corps was the last thing that this franchise needed. There's nothing to latch onto and be excited for, even with the early trailers attempting to drum up a bit of anticipation by pretending this is the most exhilarating esport ever created. As things turn out, it isn't, and in fact it's one of the most directionless, pointless games I've ever had the displeasure of playing, and thankfully, enough sensible people out there stayed the hell away from Umbrella Corps without needing to waste their money to form an educated opinion, because fucking look at it! Obviously, very few people bought it, leaving the online servers looking like a barren wasteland with a small handful of really stupid players playing a game that isn't worth an ounce of their time, and these days you're very unlikely to find enough of these silly fools to get a game going. Yes, I know it's a spin-off and never an indication of how Capcom felt about the main series of games, but Umbrella Corps can't help but feel like a shocking low point just a year before the franchise's first-person resurgence. Sometimes you need to hit rock bottom before you can start climbing. Hey, does anyone here remember Deformers? Everyone who just put their hands up, stop it, because you look ridiculous, but also, no you don't. You might think you do, because it looks like a couple of other similarly cutesy, colourful online games, but this is a game that didn't exactly have much of a shelf life, and as such, the window for both playing Deformers and remembering of any fondness is extremely limited. This is the sort of game that you'd see as part of an indie showcase at E3 among a crowd of other more interesting titles, and unless you kept up with all the news surrounding it, it's quickly a game that will be released without anyone knowing or caring about it, despite the playful aesthetic. And this is all a bit surprising, since while Deformers was created by Ready at Dawn, the same people behind porting Okami to the Wii and bringing The Order 1886 into this world, Deformers was also published by GameStop's publishing division Game Trust, and you'd imagine that they've got some sway in this industry now. This was before the big bucks came in. Deformers is a weird story, since again, there's no massive fault that would cause people to steer clear of it altogether, but there's not enough uniqueness to it for Deformers to develop its own dedicated fanbase. Plus, it receives some, let's say, mixed review scores, so I imagine that wasn't too helpful. It certainly wasn't helped by a launch price of $40, which many deemed way too expensive for a fairly bare-bones online brawler full of microtransactions, and once Deformers got off to a rocky start on release day, everything kinda snowballed out from there. There weren't enough people playing to keep the few fans the game did have entertained with hefty queue times, and some seriously low player numbers that only diminished once those semi-established fans grew frustrated and left. There were rumours floating around that GameStop employees were being offered Deformers for free to help boost player numbers online, and while this is hard to confirm, it does smack of the kind of desperation that is sadly very prevalent in this video. Servers closed just over a year after Deformers first launched, and with Ready at Dawn stating that the game wasn't financially viable anymore. Considering it started life as a physics demonstration, you could argue that it should have stayed that way. Where am I going to get my squishy cows from now? I don't think there was ever any ill intent behind Deformers, but it is a fascinating case study, both from a game development side of things, and also as a consumer, because from game development, if you were to release this game, it's a good example of what happens when you don't really put as much effort into the content of your game as you should. And from a consumer side, like, it's an example of what kind of game you get when it's overcharging you for services and for a game that is just completely unfinished, but it's being hidden behind colourful, appealing visuals. At the end of the day, games are a business, and some games hide that a lot worse than others. How many of these would you classify as self-inflicted? Maybe some, because a few of them are flawed concepts that were never likely to succeed, but rather predictably, the only way we can end off this video is by telling the story of a game that was created as such a blatant reaction to popular trends that rushed through game development at impossible speeds so that the finished product was significantly below the expected standard. That way, it's almost a combination of what we've talked about before, because it's easy to understate what an important game The Culling was for establishing an early audience for Battle Royale games. Its 2016 early access release date predates PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and Fortnite by enough for it to be ahead of the game with a genre of online gaming that is spectacularly popular these days, but when PUBG started to drag players away from the culling in 2017 and Fortnite showcased just how popular these games could be, developer Xaviant decided that something had to be done. And so the plug was pulled on the culling so that the dev team could focus all their attention on the culling 2, which will be bigger and better and definitely not a pathetic cash grab attempting to ride the coattails of better, more established battle royales. How embarrassing and degrading would that be? The Culling 2 is nothing short of a disgrace, and not just one of the least popular online games for player count alone. Xaviant had convinced themselves that their franchise would still hold some clout in an oversaturated battle royale market that had left the original game behind, but despite claiming that the sequel had started development as soon as support for the first game had ended, what came out in July 2018 can barely qualify as a video game. It was clearly unfinished and rushed out in some kind of horrible alpha state to try to coincide with the start of Fortnite's new season. It kinda worked, since that first day had player peaks as high as 250, but a couple of days later that number had crashed into single digits once everyone worked out what kind of dumpster fire they were duped into playing. Single-digit player numbers is a problem for a battle royale game that can accommodate 50 players on a server, and so, rather unsurprisingly, Xaviant pulled the plug and the Culling 2 from storefronts a mere week after its launch and refunded all purchases, claiming that they would start up development of the original game again and make it free to play. Except Xaviant were low on funds after the Culling 2 turned out to be some horrendous shit, and so they made the Culling Origins, which lets you play 10 games a day for free before charging you per game. Sounds like Xaviant and their lack of success absolutely deserved each other. This is RabbidLuigi, and the Culling 2 was a spectacular failure of an online video game, but what I find extra interesting is how this game's reputation kind of became contagious to whatever Xaviant were doing, because the Culling Origins ran out of players before the end of the year and was also a bit of a train wreck, so it kind of just shows that something was rotten at Xaviant around that time, and they would have been better suited to sticking with the original The Culling and just kind of being happy with their own little niche market. You know, it's self-sabotage at its absolute finest. Hi, just want to give a quick shout out to some of my top supporters on Patreon. We have Ramon Alberto, Jerome Kiryu, Fusion Warrior, Sarah Malion, Christopher Robinson, Joe Creamer, Scott Riker, Frank Guillong, I think, I'm so sorry, The Green Scorpion, and Devon Hutt. Thank you all for supporting what I do on YouTube, and if you want to join them, you can go to patreon.com/RabbidLuigi, where I post updates and behind the scenes stuff, and we generally have a really good time. Also, what topic would you like to see me cover next? Leave your suggestion in a comment on this video, because I'll be taking the best ideas and making a poll on my community tab, which you can then vote on to decide what the next video is about. I'll be announcing the winner of the poll over on my Twitter, so make sure you follow me so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.